Oh, hey, Tom. I wanted to connect some of your calls today back to that 1980 trip by John Connally to the Middle East to commit treason and felonies that helped swing the election to Ronald Reagan by telling the leaders of, I guess it was 11 Middle Eastern countries to communicate to Iran not to accept the peace deal, which allowed Jimmy Carter to lose that crucial bit of support that could have changed the outcome of the election. And I think the lesson that I take from it, and to connect your calls together, you talked about the Vietnam War, you were talking about the Iraq War, you were talking about the 2004, election fraud. I just like to connect those things together because this is the time in a 12-year period at this crucial hinge point in our country's history that an election the outcome was potentially changed by the Republican presidential candidate's campaign coordinating felony and treason that ends up extending wars. So, I've called you before about the Chenot affair, and LBJ knew, and he kept quiet.
Right, that was the audio I played in the first hour.
Yeah, and I mentioned to you that Humphrey knew because he was told, and he made a decision not to tell the public because he thought we'd have a civil war if they understood the corruption.
Yep.
And
for people, if I can pause you right there, Patrick, for just a moment, just for people who may be tuning in, I probably only about 10% of the audience that was listening when I played this in the first hour are still listening, because that's just the nature of radio. About every 15 minutes, you see about a 10 or 15% turnover in your audience. This is a clip of Lyndon Johnson calling Everett Dirksen. He was the senior-most Republican in the United States Senate. He was arguably the most powerful Republican in the United States. He was an elder statesman. He was, generally speaking, a good guy, Everett Dirksen. I had and continue to have a lot of respect. He had this very deep, gravelly voice. And this, and you're going to hear Lyndon Johnson saying what Patrick just said, which is, I don't want to get this in the campaign. He didn't want Americans to learn that Richard Nixon was committing treason because he thought it would harm the presidency. He thought it would harm the nation. This is Lyndon Johnson's call to Everett Dirksen.
Here's the latest information we got. The agent says that they just talked to the boss in New Mexico, and that he says that you must hold out. Just hold on until after the election. We know what Chew is saying to them out there. Yeah. We're pretty well informed on both ends. Now, I'm reading their hand, Everett. I don't want to get this in the campaign. That's right. And they oughtn't to be doing this. This is treason. I know.
I know. Dirksen didn't say, no, it's not treason.
Tom,
he said, I know.
Tom, this is so important. Can I connect this up to the Iraq War? Because we're on the 20th anniversary.
Yep.
And, give me just a tiny bit of room here. The Vietnam War goes on 6 years because of this treason. So
That's
your
correct.
friend who called, the 71 draft, all those body bags coming home. My brother was in the counter-inaugural. Yeah, my brother was in the counter-inaugural, in the street, got arrested carrying caskets when Nixon was elected in 72. I don't think that Nixon would have bugged Watergate and committed all of those crimes if it hadn't gone secret and unprosecuted what happened. People who knew didn't bring it forward, including Hubert Humphrey.
I agree.
So then the question is, what did we do about it? Well, we did the church committee. We got rid of mass surveillance. My brother had a red file. The NSA was taping phones. We had a court suit. We got rid of that. We created FISA. All of these things to take back our democracy, to stop illegal wars like Cambodia and Laos that led to a genocide because we destroyed a government and destabilized with secret illegal bombing.
Yep.
So the idea was, let's stop that. Okay, well, did we learn our lesson? No, we didn't. Because William Colby was in the airport, the CIA director, getting this information, even if Reagan's campaign didn't know, and they went and John Connally and Ben Barnes met with Reagan. I don't believe for 2 seconds that they didn't know. But Daddy Bush was a CIA director, too. So what did Daddy Bush do? He had Cap Weinberger, Secretary of Defense, committing felonies, carrying through on their side of the deal to send arms to Nicaragua.
That's right.
And I stood up in a cape as Yeah, well, yes, and I stood up in a cape, and we did the 42 of us, because 42 people had just been killed in Nicaragua, and we did the Grim Reaper at Harvard when he spoke, before we knew he was a felon, before we knew he deserved a jail cell. And then when I had my young son, after Bush was elected in 2000, we heard Daddy Bush, George H.W. Bush, say on Diane Rehm, and you can pull up the tape, that I always knew I was going to pardon them. So Ollie North had his conviction overturned, but Poindexter, who was the top guy in the White House, he got pardoned.
Yep.
And so that led directly to this impunity. And then the tapes came out that when the Iran-Contra thing was being hatched in the Reagan White House in 87, that Daddy Bush, former CIA director, was in the room, knew everything. He should have been prosecuted, but that was kept secret. So how does that tie together to today? Well, we got back to having NSA mass surveillance. We got back to having assassinations with drones. We had WMD lie take us into Iraq, and 4,500 Americans are dead from the Iraq war. 1 million related Iraqis dead, 228,000 from the war. And we destroyed their water systems. We killed all those children. And we didn't get accountability from the 80 situation. We lost the independent counsel law, so we couldn't prosecute Trump. This is a straight line of impunity.
Yeah. And it runs through the Republican Party.
Well, the Democrats went along with it, unfortunately, and they went along with the Iraq war, and they went along, my boss, Carl Levin, went along with getting rid of the independent counsel law.
Oh, geez.
And it was a terrible mistake. Moynihan went after the NSA because they spent $100 million putting together the office in Virginia where they were going to run their mass surveillance, and they hadn't told Congress. And he was head of intelligence, and he wrote a book on secrecy, and he made them destroy the building, take it down, repurpose it. And he would not let them create mass surveillance. And then Democrats and Republicans, Bush and Obama, made it legal, created a set of rules behind it, and we needed Ed Snowden to tell us it was happening. The Church Committee had already taken care of that.
You're right.
My boss, Colin Seitz in the Third Circuit, was the chief judge on the appeals court for the Star Chamber for the FISA panel. They didn't grant those warrants. We had a collapse of the rule of law, and this 1980 arms for hostages secret deal to deny Carter a fair chance of winning, tied back to what Nixon did, is an example of where we went wrong.
Right. And it all paved the way for Trump and his criminality. I mean, here, this is a story from a couple of weeks ago that I was going to do on the air and never got around to. The headline is, DHS admits it tried to manufacture fake terrorists for Trump's political gain. This was an investigation that Ron Wyden did, that Chad Wolf was pulling together secret dossiers on people here in Portland, and they wanted to describe them as terrorists. They fully intended to, actually, and it just kind of got blown up at the last minute. But this was, and then Trump was going to use that as his justification for attacking the United States.